Hi, welcome to this week's video. I am so thrilled to have my friend Dr. Susan back with us, and we're talking about something that is not only really important, but also really sensitive.
So sensitive.
At the same time. So we've decided to call it Ditch the Scale, Feel Great, Be Healthy, and Have a Positive Body Image. And there is a lot that encompasses all that, isn't there?
For sure. So much.
Yeah.
You know, I was just thinking how crazy it is that we value ourselves by a number on the scale.
Yes.
We're putting this body on a scale, and then I know for me it can change my mood for the day. I feel good
Yep.
or bad about what this machine tells me. So we're really talking about getting away from focusing on our weight and focusing more on what makes us healthy as far as our body composition. Now, for sure, certain amounts of fat and muscle are healthier than others, but get rid of the scale. Let's just stop focusing on that number.
And
start.
it's so antiquated when you think about it,
Isn't it?
because it's not a metric for health.
Not at all. It really isn't. You know, before we had anything else, I suppose it was useful. But now, you know, body mass index, which is still commonly used, just a combination of height and weight,
Right.
misses so much because you could be very muscular and have a high body mass index that could even put you in an overweight category when, of course, you're very healthy. And on the other hand, I have a lot of patients who are very slim on the scale, but they've got too much body fat for optimal health. So ditch the scale. I don't think body mass index is really that useful. You know, a funny story, in medical school, I was taught that we should weigh 100 pounds for 5 feet, and 1 inch after that added 5 pounds. So for example, being 5'5", I should weigh 125 pounds, which is such an outrageous statement.
Yeah.
We want to empower you to advocate for yourself and just not believe that anymore.
No. And I think too, you know, and we talk about this all the time. When you hit midlife, especially 40s, and your body starts to change, you go through perimenopause and then into menopause, you really feel that your body is oftentimes sabotaging you, and it gets harder and harder to do the work and get the same results. So let's talk about these hormone changes that factor into our overall health.
Yes, for sure. And you know, it really is true in a way that our body is fighting against us when we enter perimenopause. A lot of hormone changes occur that are normal but don't feel optimal, and we've talked a lot about that before. But if we look at the ovarian hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, each one of those plays a part in our feeling of well-being. And while it isn't exactly true that going through menopause causes you to gain weight because you're lacking those hormones, it's more of an indirect way in which those hormones prevent us from sleeping well. They take away our energy, our feeling of well-being decreases. So for me, when I don't sleep well, I've got no energy, I want to eat comfort foods, I don't want to work out. And so it just starts a cascade that can go in a direction that feels out of control. And then also other hormones like cortisol that we've talked about a lot. That's a stress hormone. That goes up when we're stressed, either emotionally, physically, or from sleep deprivation. Again, that adds to our ability to store fat. And so our body is trying its best to help us to survive, but indirectly is fighting against our desire to stay more lean. So it does get more difficult.
Right. But it doesn't mean you can't fight the good fight.
That's right.
And the payoff is great when you do. And so what we are presenting today are really 7 strategies to be successful in this area. So you feel like you are in control of your health, your well-being, you feel good. In the end, that's what this is all about. It's about feeling good and being healthy.
Right, and I love just the idea of feeling in control. And all of us, I'm a bit of a control freak. I like to feel in control. And during perimenopause, I can tell you, I did not feel in control. It really felt like a train that was going off the tracks. But just to say, if you're feeling that way, you are not alone. And you can get this back inside your control. There are ways of managing these changes so that you can get into the second half of life feeling like you've got it, that you can make the changes that you need to, and you will be successful.
Right. So step number 1, and I did a little display, a little lunch display for us, and that is the food that we put on our plate. So talk about what that should look like.
Right. So if we talk about nutrition being really one of the first steps to managing a healthy body composition, the science is pretty clear now that eating high protein foods and incorporating some type of prolonged fasting during the day are really helpful ways to fight against those hormonal changes that are causing us to gain weight. So one of the things that you've talked about a lot is intermittent fasting. I know that works for you. I like some form of that too. And for me, I think the most important part is not consuming calories a couple of hours before bed And then also a couple of hours after you wake up, and you might extend that to 16 hours a day, but even starting with 2 hours before bed and eating no more than eating 2 hours after you wake up gives you a prolonged period to be in a fat burning mode, because if we're not consuming calories, our body will turn to fat to provide us with energy. So high protein is really interesting, I think, because not only is it delicious and filling, but it actually takes more energy for our body to metabolize protein than other sources of food. So when we're eating protein, we're eating delicious food, we're getting full, we're providing our muscles with the nutrients that we need to maintain and build muscle, and we're also burning more calories in the process. So lots of protein and a prolonged period of fasting are two of my favorite tricks.
Yes, and I know you love fiber. You're a believer in all the produce, the colorful foods, and to stay away from the whites.
That's right. So if we lived on protein and colorful vegetables, our body would be very happy. So lower carbohydrates, lower sugar, all of us know that by now. But harder to adopt is things like getting rid of gluten and other inflammatory foods that cause our gut to have a lot of other health issues. That's a topic for another day. But beautiful salads, colorful vegetables, a protein element, maybe starting from 8 to 8 and extending it from 12 to 8. And your body's going to relax from this crisis mode that feels like fight or flight. And if you think about it, if we were cave people, not burning fat when there was an emergency would have made a lot of sense. But now we want to relax into a state where we can burn fat. So eating those healthy foods, and we're going to talk more about some other tips and tricks as we go.
Yeah. The second one I know on your list is exercise and finding the right exercise for you.
That's right. So, and these words can be triggering even, can't they? So when we talk about diet, often that just causes a cringe. So I like the word nutrition. We talked about number one. And then maybe even using the word movement instead of exercise. I think I find is a little bit less triggering, because a lot of us find exercise automatically just shuts us down to thinking, I don't like it, it's going to be painful. But incorporating movement into our daily routine, we all know is really important. And it doesn't have to be that much. In fact, we can exercise too much.
Yes.
So something like 20 to 30 minutes of cardiovascular movement, and find something fun, something that you enjoy, so it's not hard to stick to. Yeah. Maybe it's dancing, maybe it's walking your dog, swimming. Doesn't have to be running a marathon or doing anything difficult.
Sure.
Unless you want to. And then adding some strength training, which is really critical because
for muscle and bone. Right?
That's right. As we get older, as many of us are experiencing, we lose muscle and gain fat. The less muscle we have, the lower our metabolism is. So it becomes one of those vicious cycles. So personally, I do 2 days a week of 30 minutes of strength training. It's really very little, and I'm able to gain muscle. I feel stronger. And, I think it's interesting when we feel physically stronger, how that affects our mental strength, too. I just feel better about myself when I've got physical strength.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just going into our later years to prevent osteoporosis and bone break as well.
That's right. And other things that I started thinking about more, I wear reading glasses. We're a little off balance. So, you fall, you get injured. Next thing you know, you break a bone and you become immobilized. So these very small things can turn into big problems if we don't have good, strong muscles to help with balance.
Right. Let's talk about hormonal balance. That was one thing that you mentioned too.
Yeah, so hormone balance I think is really important to address as part of just our optimal health in general, but especially with maintaining our optimal body composition. Yeah. As we lose those ovarian hormones that we've talked about, we don't sleep well, cortisol goes up, we store more fat, we can become depressed, our moods can change so that we don't want to exercise. So there's a cascade of events that can happen that just make this feel more difficult. So menopausal hormone balance I think is critical, as well as that thyroid, which we know controls our metabolism, really needs to be checked very carefully because it's very common for that to drop as we get older.
Yes.
And then other hormones like cortisol that we've mentioned, and insulin, which is the hormone that controls our glucose metabolism. And insulin resistance is a very common condition that we develop with age that's a precursor to diabetes that also helps us to gain weight more quickly. So having all of those things checked I think is really critical. And there's some other fun hormones too. There's so many. There are hormones that actually control our hunger and fullness or satiety that we can also address that you might have heard of. Things like leptin, which is a fullness hormone. ghrelin, which is a hormone that makes us feel hungry, and some really exciting research that is behind most of the common weight loss drugs used now, a substance called GLP, or glucagon-like peptide, which also controls the feeling of fullness. Now, a lot of research is going on in these areas, but just to say, hormones play a huge part in how all of this works.
Yeah. The next one on the list is probably my top and my favorite, sleep. And I think it is surprising to so many people how important sleep is for the management of all of this.
Absolutely. You know, those of us who have experienced perimenopause, or if you're going through it now, the most painful symptom that I hear from my patients every day is sleep deprivation, and how critical and how terrible that feels when it's prolonged and happens over and over again. So often that is related to hormone imbalance as well as stress. So lots of ways to manage that we can probably talk about in a whole nother hour, but
we should.
Sleeping is really important. So there are some very good studies that show clearly that the number of hours we sleep is very closely associated with our ability to burn fat. Cortisol goes up, as we've mentioned. We feel moody, grumpy, tired, don't want to exercise. Right. It's really critical to sleep. And not only sleep, but just to rest. And as someone who's been an athlete most of my life, I grew up in the sleep when you're dead mentality.
Yes.
You know, sleep was not valued. As an obstetrician, we actually prided ourselves on how little we could sleep. That was a value system, which was very unhealthy.
It is.
So now understanding that we need that time to rest. So while I'm simultaneously talking about exercising, don't exercise every day. Give yourself a day off where you float in the pool, do yoga, listen to music. And I can tell you, when my coach told me that when I was training for some very long distance races, I said, I don't have time for that. I need to run around and do a bunch of errands. We need to make time for that.
Yes,
right.
We do. Our body has to recover, and it's amazing how much more efficient it becomes when it does.
Absolutely. We can exercise too much, we can sleep too little, we can eat too little, and that can actually make us gain weight. So rest and recovery is critical.
Yes.
For everything on mental health, but also as part of this optimal body composition picture.
Yeah, I know this is something that you're starting to offer in your practice, helping women in midlife manage all of this. Is there ever a point where medication needs to be considered?
Well, for some patients, it's an option, absolutely. So the medications that have traditionally been around for weight loss have had a lot of problems. As we know, if you look back through the history in our lifetime of weight loss drugs, they were amphetamine-based. Things like phentermine, fen-phen.
Right, to speed it up.
Right. I mean, you could also do cocaine, but not good for us, right? So the most recent class of weight loss drugs, which are FDA approved and very effective, work on that GLP pathway that I mentioned, which is a very powerful appetite suppressant, very safe, and actually was developed as a diabetic medication. So it's been around for a long, long time, and your listeners might know it under brand names like Wegovy, Ozempic, Saxenda, semaglutide. They're all similar versions of the same thing. But for patients who are struggling with managing cravings, which is a real thing, it doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you if you have trouble managing cravings. We have hormones in our system that draw us to eat food, and so these drugs can really help to manage those cravings and reduce appetite so that we can more easily manage our portions, because that's really what it comes down to. After all is said and done, consuming less food, but consuming healthy food and at the right times of day. So it can be really helpful for some patients, absolutely.
And let's talk about the emotionality of this and why it can be so difficult to address sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know that you've shared some of your story. I share the same, and I'm sure all of us do in some way, having grown up with unhealthy relationships with food and just this conditioning around the certain number that makes us valuable and another number that doesn't. Which, when we think about it, when I think about it, and I tell you, I still struggle with it today, but it really is a bit crazy. And I think it comes from a really old patriarchal society where women were judged based on being small. And now, we're looking at a whole different picture now, where we're looking at health. Not only longevity, but health span. How to have the body that gives us the best opportunity to live the healthiest, happiest life And who cares what that number says?
Yeah, and thankfully, advertising and society in general is really getting away from that quote unquote ideal and that body shaming, and is far more embracing of different body types, as it should be. Moral of the story is empowerment, that you feel like you have control over this and it doesn't have control over you. And I think all of these are such sound, logical, practical ways, and oftentimes, sometimes women need an advocate. They need a partner. That partner could be their spouse or somebody who is embracing the same modality, or that partner could be a wellness practitioner like yourself, who basically guides and shows the way.
Accountability is so important. You know, for many, many years, Weight Watchers, which is still a fantastic weight loss program, was always better than its competitors because they had that group meeting. Now, as it's evolved over time, and with COVID and Weight Watchers has shifted to much of an online program, we've seen that accountability portion's gone away. But accountability is so good for me. I actually meet with a trainer twice a week, and I can tell you, if I didn't have that appointment, probably a lot of days I would sleep in or I wouldn't go. So your accountability partner might be your spouse, might be your best friend, might be a trainer, or it could be a doctor, someone to do this with, because it is really tough to do this alone. And so I think that's a really important factor that helps any program to succeed, to have somebody to be there to be your cheerleader when it's working, and to support you on the days that it's not.
Yeah, we all need a network, we need a community, and realize that we're not alone and we're not in this alone.
That's right.
So, and it's not as bad and as scary as it all can be made out to be. There are so many wonderful ways and solutions, and I'm so glad that we flushed it out. We're going to ditch the scale, we're going to get rid of it because it's not a valid metric, and just live healthy lives. So thank you for your wisdom and your advice. I always love having you. I do think our next video literally is going to be a 30-minute talk on sleep alone.
It's one of the most important things, for sure. And I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for joining us. Have a great week.